I have buried enough patience in Wraithmore Wells to know that the town keeps two kinds of secrets, the kind that killed someone and the kind that is still, 20 years on, keeping someone alive. It took me the better part of my life to learn to tell them apart. It took the Duke of Hallowmere considerably longer, and it took the woman who came to ruin him in print no time at all, 3 days, by my reckoning, though she would tell you it was longer, because she is a woman who likes to believe she is harder to move than she is. I am Peter Wren, physician to this town for the better part of 2 decades, and I set down what follows because I was there for most of it, and because a man ought to write down the one true thing he watched happen in his lifetime, before he forgets the ordinary shape of it and remembers only the ending. She came in on the Bath coach on the 2nd of December, in a bonnet gone out of fashion 2 winters before, and a temper that had clearly not been out of fashion in any winter at all. I did not know her name that first day. I knew only that she stood in the colonnade outside the pump room asking the porter, in a voice pitched to carry, whether it was true that His Grace the Duke of Hallowmere spent above £400 a year on tallow and glass to keep a superstition burning on a hill. The porter, wisely, said he could not say. I could have told her it was closer to 600 most years, and that the Duke paid it from his own purse when the town's subscription fell short, which it had fallen short every year but 2 since I had known him. I did not tell her this. I was, at that moment, more interested in the fact that Alaric Vane, Duke of Hallowmere, was crossing the colonnade not 10 yards behind her, and had plainly heard every word. He is not a small man, and he does not walk quietly, but she did not turn until he spoke. 600 this year, he said. You have undercharged me by 1/3. If you are going to ruin a man in print, madam, do him the courtesy of ruining him accurately. I have known Alaric since we were boys sent down together from the same tutor for the same infraction, a matter of a stolen boat and a lake we had been expressly forbidden to sail on, and I had rarely seen him take a stranger's measure so quickly, nor, I think, been so quickly taken himself. She turned. She did not flinch, which very few people manage on first meeting him. He is tall in the particular way that makes rooms rearrange themselves around him, dark-headed, level-eyed, with the sort of face that had been called cold by men who had never seen him kneel in the frost to close a dying tenant's eyes, as I had seen him do twice. I am not here to ruin anyone, she said. I am here to report a fact. If the fact ruins him, the fault is his arithmetic, not my pen. And whose pen is it? He asked. You wrote to my steward under the name J.R. Ashe. I confess I expected a gentleman. You may go on expecting one, she said, and I will go on writing the column, and neither of us need be disappointed twice. I want to be honest, because I promised myself I would be honest in the writing of this, and say that I did not, in that first exchange, see the thing that came later. I saw 2 people who disliked each other on sight and were rather enjoying it. I did not yet know her name was Fairweather, or that the name had once meant something in London before it meant nothing, or that the column she wrote under a man's initials was the only thing standing between her father and a debtor's cell. I knew only that the Duke, who had not smiled without effort in some years, was almost smiling, and that this alarmed me more than anything else that had happened that week. Her name I learned within the day, because Wraithmore Wells is not a town that keeps a secret past supper, was Eleanor Fairweather, Nell, to the 2 or 3 who dared it, and she had been sent, or had sent herself, for the fee was hers whichever way one told it, to write a piece for the London Intelligencer on what her editor's letter called the vain folly. 20 unbroken years in which the Duke of Hallowmere had funded, defended, and personally lit, on the eve of Twelfth Night, a chain of lanterns from the town gate to the ruined chapel on the hill above it, a custom the town called, without much originality, the lighting, and had come to depend upon the way a man depends upon a habit he has stopped questioning. I learned the rest of it more slowly, and mostly from her in the fortnight that followed, in the pump room where I dispensed the waters, and rather more advice than anyone asks for. Her father had been Josiah Fairweather, a natural philosopher of some reputation 15 years before, until he had made it his business to expose a haunting at a great house in Kent. A matter of a weeping lady in a West Tower who turned out, on Josiah Fairweather's patient investigation, to be a drafty flea and a housemaid with a grudge. He had published his findings with more relish than tact, had named names, had been sued, had lost, and had spent the family's remaining fortune on the suit and the family's remaining credit on the losing of it. He was, when Nell spoke of him, alive still, but diminished, a man who sat by a window in rented rooms in Bloomsbury and corrected, in the margins of newspapers, errors of fact that no longer mattered to anyone. He was right, she told me once, in the pump room, with the particular fierceness of a woman defending a parent she has stopped being able to protect any other way. He was right about the flea and right about the maid and right about every ghost he ever chased down to its true cause, and it ruined him for being right, because people would rather be haunted than be told the truth. So yes, Dr. Wren, I write under initials, and yes, I go where the fee is. And if your Duke has been burning £600 a year on a story about a lantern that leads the dead home, I intend to write down what it actually is, because someone in this family has to be believed eventually, and it will not be my father. I did not that day ask her what she believed the lighting actually was. I suspected she did not yet know herself. She had arrived with a conclusion and was gathering the facts to fit it, which is a common enough sickness in the young and the wronged, and she was, I judged, a little of both. The public sparring, for it became public within the week, in the way that anything involving the Duke of Hallowmere becomes public in a town the size of a good handkerchief, took the shape of the Assembly Rooms Thursday evenings, where Nell Fairweather appeared with a notebook she did not trouble to hide, and a habit of asking questions that made the alderman's wife choke on her ratafia. "Your Grace," she said, the second Thursday, in the hearing of perhaps 40 people, "is it true you have refused 3 separate offers from the county to purchase the hill and the chapel ruin for a modest sum, on the sole condition that the lighting continue there, and that you have refused because a purchaser might, in time, elect to let the custom lapse?" "It is true," Alaric said. "And is it not true that the money spent on tallow, glass, and the wages of the men who carry the lanterns up in weather that has, on 2 occasions in this decade, nearly killed one of them, could instead endow the almshouse, or the school, or repair the bridge at Courting Lane, which has wanted repair for 6 years?" "It is also true," Alaric said, and here I watched him choose, quite visibly, not to give her the answer that would have ended the argument and kept his privacy intact. "I have no defense of the arithmetic, Miss Fairweather, only that I intend to go on doing it." "That," she said, "is not a reason, that is a man refusing to give one." "It is the only reason I have," he said, and something in his voice, I had known him 30 years and I heard it, closed a door she had not yet found the handle of. She wrote that exchange down. I saw her do it. And I saw, too, that she did not write it down triumphantly, the way she had written down the £600. She wrote it down the way a person writes down a thing that has begun, against their will, to interest them for reasons that have stopped being professional. I will not pretend the town made it easy for her to remain merely curious. Alderman Grieve, a decent man with a decent man's blindness to anything that cannot be entered in a ledger, took her aside after that same Thursday and told her, not unkindly, that she would be doing the town a service if her column persuaded his Grace to see reason, for the bridge at Courting Lane had indeed wanted mending for 6 years, and old Mrs. Aldous had gone into the ditch there with her cart not a fortnight past and broken her wrist. Which I had set myself and can attest was no metaphor. Grieve was not a villain. He wanted the bridge mended and the almshouse roof seen to, and he had watched the Duke spend on a hillside what would have done both twice over, and he could not, for the life of him, see what he was meant to feel about a story instead of a bridge. Nell listened to him with the particular attention she gave to anyone who confirmed what she had come to believe, and she told me afterward, walking back along the colonnade in the early dark, that grief had the right of it, that whatever sentiment kept the lighting burning, sentiment did not mend bridges, and a duke who let an old woman break her wrist for the sake of a lantern chain had his priorities inverted in a way that ought to be printed and read aloud in every drawing room in the county. He is not unfeeling, I said, because I could not let that pass. I have known him since we were boys. He gave the almshouse its new roof 4 years back out of his own pocket, and never told a soul until the roofer's bill was found by his steward by accident. He is not a man who does not care for bridges, Miss Fairweather. He is a man carrying something he has never once in 20 years told anyone the shape of. Then let him tell it, she said. A man who will not explain himself has forfeited the right to be defended by other people on his behalf. I thought that a hard thing to say of a man she had known a fortnight, and told her so. I have been hard on softer evidence than this, she said, and been right. And there was something in the way she said it, quick, and then quickly covered, as though she had let slip more of her father's grief than she meant to, that told me she was not, whatever she believed of herself, arguing about the Duke at all. The turn, and I have thought a great deal in the years since about exactly where to place it, because it did not come all at once. The way a scene in a novel comes began with a name in a parish register. I do not know precisely how she found her way to the sexton's book. She would tell you, I imagine, that it was simple diligence. A woman writing a piece of investigation goes where investigation leads. An investigation, in a town the size of Wraithmore Wells, leads eventually to the church, and the church keeps its records. She spent an afternoon there by the sexton's account, working back through 20 years of burials, hunting. She told him, for the origin of the custom, some founding scandal or swindle she could set at the Duke's door. She found a boy instead. Simon Vane, buried the 11th of January 20 years past, aged 9 years. Younger brother to Alaric, 9th Duke of Hallowmere, then himself a boy of 13, and by the date of the burial and the date of his father's own death 8 months prior, already the Duke. I was in the pump room when she came to find me, and I will say that I had never, in all our acquaintance, seen her at a loss for a question. He had a brother, she said. It was not quite a question. He did. He never told me. He has never told me the whole of it either, I said, and I have known him 30 years. I know only what I was there for, which is the burying, and a little of the 8 months before it, which I would as soon not have been there for. She sat down across from me, which she had not done before. She had always, until then, stood over her questions, as though sitting might concede something. And she asked me, very quietly, to tell her what I knew. I told her what I knew. Simon Vane had been a sickly child from the cradle, the kind of sickliness the old Duke, a hard, correct, unloving man, God rest him and forgive me for saying it, had regarded as a family embarrassment rather than a family grief. Alaric had been the healthy one, the heir, the one sent off to the same tutor as myself. Simon had been kept at home in the charge of nurses, and had grown, in the way of children who are given little else, extraordinarily fond of his brother's rare visits, and extraordinarily full of the kind of belief that healthy children lose early and sick ones sometimes never do. He had believed, with the whole of his small and diminishing strength, in the light on the hill. It was an old story in the county, older than either of us, older than the Vanes' holding of the dukedom, that on 12th night a lantern chain from the town gate to the ruined chapel on the hill would light the way home for anyone lost, living or otherwise, and that so long as the chain was unbroken, no soul making that last journey home would go astray in the dark. It had been, for generations, a modest custom, a handful of townsfolk carrying candles up a familiar path, more habit than faith. Simon Vane, dying by inches through a winter he was not expected to survive, had fixed upon it with the whole of a child's literal heart, and had asked his brother, not his father, who would not have troubled to answer but Alaric. 13 years old and already, in every way that mattered, the man of that cold house, to promise him that the chain would never break. That whatever happened to him, the light would find its way up the hill every year, without fail, so that if he was ever lost in the dark on the other side of it, he would know the way back to the people who loved him. He died on the 10th of January in the small hours, 3 days after 12th night that year, having lived just long enough. The old nurse who told me this had wept in the telling to see, from his window, the last of that year's lanterns going up the hill, and to say, so I am told, that he was not afraid, because now he knew the way. Alaric buried him the 11th. He was duke by then in every sense but the ceremony, his father 8 months dead, and he stood at that grave, 13 years old, and made himself the promise his brother had asked of him, and he has kept it without one single year's failure for 20 years. He has never told anyone why, past his father's steward and myself, and lately, it seems, a girl he had known a fortnight and taken an instant, argumentative liking to. Nell Fairweather did not speak for some while after I finished. I watched something happen to her face that I have only ever seen happen to the face of a person confronted, unexpectedly, with a grief that outweighs their own, not smaller than her father's ruin, but differently shaped, and old in a way that made her own wound look, for a moment, young. "He let me stand in the assembly rooms," she said at last, "and ask him about arithmetic. He is not a man who explains himself to be spared an argument," I said. "I imagine he would rather be thought a fool over a lantern than be pitied over a grave." I called it a folly, in front of 40 people. "You did?" "I meant to print that it was a folly, in a newspaper, under a name that is not mine, to an editor who has never once asked me whether the things I write are kind, only whether they are quotable." "And will you?" I asked her, because I thought by then that I already knew the answer, though I do not think she knew it herself yet. She did not answer me. She took up her bonnet and went out into the colonnade, and I watched her walk the length of it twice, slowly, the way a person walks when they are trying to outpace a thought that keeps catching them up. But I do not know everything that passed between them in the 8 days that followed, because a great deal of it, by both their accounts and by simple decency, was theirs alone. I know what I saw, which was this, that the sparring did not stop, but it changed its weather. She still asked him hard questions in the pump room and the colonnade, whether the tallow could not be had cheaper from a Bristol chandler, whether the men who carried the lanterns were paid fairly for the risk of the hill path and ice, whether he had ever, in 20 years, considered that the town's bridge and the town's belief might both be permitted to stand. But she asked them now the way one asks questions of a person one is trying to understand rather than a person one has already condemned. And he answered her, more and more, the way a man answers someone he has stopped needing to defend himself against. I saw them once, from my window above the colonnade, standing together at the foot of the hill path in the last light of a short December afternoon, not touching, not even, so far as I could tell, speaking for some while, only standing, the two of them, looking up at the chapel ruin at the top. And I thought, watching them, that I was looking at two people who had each spent a long time being right about something painful, and had each just discovered how heavy that particular kind of rightness is to carry alone. He told her about Simon. I know this because he told me he had told her, some days later, with the awkward, unpracticed gratitude of a man setting down a weight he has carried so long he has forgotten it is a weight. He did not tell her, I think, expecting anything of it. He told her, he said, because she had asked him, not in the assembly rooms, not for her column, but quietly, on the hill path, whether the promise had been his own idea, and something in the plainness of the question had undone 20 years of not answering it. She did not soften when I told her, he said to me, the evening before 12th night in my own parlor, over a glass of the brandy I keep for occasions exactly this troublesome. I confess I expected her to. Most people do, they go gentle, as though grief were a thing that ought to be handled with cotton wool. She did not. She asked me whether I still believed the lantern led anyone home, or whether I had simply never found the courage to stop, and Peter, I did not have an answer for her. 20 years, and I did not have an answer. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, he said, that I do not know whether the dead find their way by lantern light, and that I have long since stopped needing to know, because the not knowing was never the point. The point was a boy who asked me for one thing before he died, and I am not, whatever the alderman thinks of my arithmetic, going to be the man who tells him, even 20 years too late, that I could not be troubled to keep it. I did not tell him, that evening, what Nell Fairweather had told me not 3 hours before, sitting in my own consulting chair with her notebook shut on her lap for the first time since I had known her, that she had written her column, the one her editor was waiting for, the one that would have paid the debt hanging over her father's rented rooms in Bloomsbury, and that she had torn it up. I cannot print it, she had said. I came here to write about a fool who burns £600 a year on a story. I cannot print that because he is not a fool, and I have spent a fortnight discovering that the difference between a fool and a man keeping faith with someone he loved is not a difference of fact, Dr. Wren. It is a difference of whether you have the courage to look at the whole of a thing before you decide what it is. My father never had that courage. He looked at the flue and the drafty tower and called it the whole truth, and perhaps it was the whole truth of the haunting, but it was not the whole truth of what people needed the tower to mean. I do not intend to make his mistake twice, in a different town, over a different hill. Your editor will not thank you for that, I said. No, she agreed, and I do not know how I am to pay what I owe without his fee, but I would rather owe a debt honestly than be paid for a lie about a dead child, and if that is my father's blood in me after all, then perhaps it was never the worst of what he gave me. My 12th night in Wraithmore Wells is kept in the assembly rooms until dusk, and on the hill after, the town gathers first for music and a supper the alderman's wife has overseen every year of my tenure, and then, as the light goes, moves out to the town gate to watch the lanterns lit and carried, one by one, up to the ruined chapel, where the Duke himself lights the last and largest at the chapel door, alone, as his brother had once watched him promise to do. It is the town's habit in recent years to make a small ceremony of the moment before the lighting. The alderman says a few words, someone reads a verse, and this year, because the whole of Wraithmore Wells had spent a fortnight reading a stranger's pointed questions in the assembly rooms and waiting, with the particular relish small towns bring to any brewing scandal, for the verdict of the London column everyone knew was coming, the alderman turned to Nell Fairweather. In front of perhaps 200 people gathered at the gate with their unlit candles, and asked her, not entirely without malice, though I believe he thought himself merely fair, whether she would care to share, before the lighting began, what she had concluded. I saw Alaric go still beside me. I do not think he had expected her to be asked, and I do not think, watching his face, that he expected anything of her answer but the exposure he had braced himself for since her coach first came in. She stepped forward. She had not, I noticed, brought her notebook. I came to this town, she said, and her voice, pitched for the pump room, carried easily to the back of the crowd at the gate, to write that His Grace the Duke of Hallowmere spends £600 a year on a superstition, and that the town's bridge and school and almshouse would be better served by that money than a chain of lanterns up a hill. I want to tell you that I still believe the bridge at Courting Lane wants mending, and I hope, alderman, that it is mended and soon, and by whatever means the town can find that need not touch this. There was a small, unsettled murmur at that, the crowd, I think, uncertain which way the wind was about to blow. But I did not come here to write about arithmetic, she went on, though I believed I had. I came here, though I did not know it yet, to find out whether there is a difference between a foolish belief and a faithful one. And I have found that there is, and that the difference is not what a debunking column can measure, because it is not a difference of fact. It is a difference of what the fact is for. 20 years ago, a boy of 9, dying in that house on the hill road, asked his brother, a boy of 13, newly a duke, newly fatherless, and I think, though he has never said so to me in these words, entirely alone, to promise him that the light would never go out on this hill, so that if he was ever lost in the dark, he would know the way home. His brother has kept that promise every single year since, in sickness and in poor harvests, and in years the town's own subscription could not meet its share, without once telling a living soul why, because he did not want to be thanked, and he did not want to be pitied, and most of all, I think, he did not want anyone to tell him it was foolish, because some part of him has spent 20 years afraid that it might be. I do not know whether a lantern can light a dead child's way home. I am my father's daughter, and my father spent his life proving that the things people believe in the dark rarely survive an honest look in daylight, and I came here fully prepared to give this custom that same honest look in print whatever I found. I have given it that look, and what I found was not a fool, and not a swindle, and not 600 pounds of waste. What I found was a promise kept past the point of anyone asking it to be, by a man who would rather be called foolish by strangers than break faith with a boy who is not here to know whether he did. I have no verdict for you, alderman, that fits in a column. I have only this: whatever the light on that hill does or does not do for the dead, I have watched this fortnight exactly what it has done for the living. It has kept a promise from becoming a regret, and I do not think, whatever the arithmetic says, that this town is poorer for it. I will not pretend the silence that followed was uniform in its sentiment. I saw Alderman Greaves' face, and it was the face of a man whose bridge was still unmended, and I do not fault him that. But I saw, too, old Mrs. Aldous, wrist still bound from her fall in the very ditch under discussion, reach out and take her neighbor's hand, and I saw more than a few candles lifted before the alderman had even given the word. Alaric did not move for a long moment. Then he crossed to where she stood, not swiftly, not for show, but the way a man walks when he has stopped needing an audience to witness what he means, and he did not thank her, and he did not, that I could see, say anything at all. He held out his hand, and she took it, and together, in front of 200 people who had come expecting a scandal and got instead a confession, they walked to the town gate and took up the first lantern, and carried it between them to the foot of the hill. I followed with the rest, up the path in the last blue light, past every carried candle, to the chapel door, where it has been the custom for 20 years that the Duke lights the final lantern alone. He did not light it alone that year. He put the taper in her hand along with his own, and their two hands lit it together, and the light went up over the ruined stones the way it had gone up every 12th night of my life in this town, and I do not know still whether it lights any road but the ones we walk ourselves. I know only that Simon Vane's brother stood at that chapel door with his hand over a woman's hand for the first time in 20 years without a single soul left to wonder why, and that when I looked at Nell Fairweather's face in the lantern light, I saw, for the first time since her coach had come in on the 2nd of December, a woman who had stopped bracing herself against being fooled, and found, instead, something worth being fooled by after all. They were married the following autumn, in the same chapel, its ruin by then a little less ruined for the town's having taken, of its own accord, to keeping it swept. Josiah Fairweather came down from Bloomsbury for it, an old man leaning on a stick and his daughter's arm in equal measure, and I heard him tell the Duke, at the wedding breakfast, with the particular gruffness of a man who has spent his life valuing facts, and has just been handed one he did not expect to be glad of, that he had investigated a great many hauntings in his time and never once found a true one, but that he would allow, on the evidence before him, that a promise kept 20 years running was as close to a miracle as a rational man was likely to be permitted, and he would not, this once, trouble to explain it away. The lighting still burns every 12th night on that hill. The bridge at Courting Lane was mended the spring after, by subscription, the Duke's, first among them, for he had learned, I think, that a man can keep more than one promise at a time if he only stops believing they must compete. And I am told, though I have not asked her directly, that Nell Vane, Duchess of Hallowmere, still writes, not for the Intelligencer, not under initials that are not her own, but under her own name, for whoever will have the truth of a thing told whole, and not merely the half of it that is easiest to prove. I keep this account for no better reason than that I was there for the burying of one Vane brother, and there, 20 years later, for the making of a marriage that grew out of the grave he was so grieved to leave. It has taught me, more than any physic I have practiced in this town, that the difference between superstition and faith is very often nothing more than whether a person had the courage to ask what a belief cost the one who kept it, and that the coldest-seeming men and the hardest-seeming women are very often only carrying, each of them, a promise they were too proud or too frightened to set down until someone finally asked them to explain it.